Welcome to another Bit by Bit. This is the show where we like to talk about the latest happenings in the technology industry, which is a very event-rich industry in terms of early December. We were all over the place. You were in more places than me. Um, but today's topic is on one that a lot of people have some sensitivity about, this thing we call the AI PC, or something that we're going to hear more about in the AI PC. There was an AMD event where this happened. There was an Intel event where this term came up. There was, leading up to this event, I think the term itself didn't catch anyone by surprise. But I'll sort of let you kind of launch into the initial, what's our take on this AI PC at the end of 2023 as we roll into 2024?
I think I'm going to start with something that you and I have been fairly public about, which is that we hate the term. We're in a somewhat fortunate position to only criticize somebody else's numbers versus coming up with our own. So there is that. It's hard for, like, my ex-employer, Gartner, our colleagues at IDC, to create buckets because market share is important and counting beans remains important. And so there will be one definition. But I think ultimately the reason why I in particular I'm not a fan of the term is eventually everything is going to be an AI PC, right? That's one reason. So longer term, you're going to have to change how you think about the AI PC and the definitions that you have. And maybe because I still have PTSD when I change the definitions and the categories at Gartner, it's painful when you do that. Nobody's ever happy. The second one is that there will be different degrees of intelligence within the PC business because of the silicon that some of these devices will run and because of some decisions that Microsoft will make about what features will end up where. So that might create some confusion as to what you call which model. And then lastly, I would say, because this is really a time where, in my opinion, the PC ecosystem has a true opportunity to deliver great value to users. Whether you're a consumer or you're an enterprise user, having a device that is capable of running AI in some shape or form at different level, like the OS level and then the app level, is going to be critical, and it will really bring to life the PC as we've never seen before. And one of the things that I like the most is the fact that a lot of users that don't consider themselves tech savvy will actually have the ability to do so much more with their PC. And so I'm worried and somewhat frustrated that, we maybe get into a pickle with the name versus actually focusing on the value that is absolutely 100% real for the user.
Yeah, I think, just looking at Intel's commentary, it feels like Pat Gelsinger's comments agreed with you. The bucket that he said is this is like a Centrino moment where
Yes.
I remember those days. There were devices that had Wi-Fi,
I don't, because I'm
there
younger.
there were devices that didn't have Wi-Fi, and eventually it just obviously made sense for every device to have Wi-Fi because it enhanced your that connectivity enhanced your PC experience. So I agree with Pat in the context that that's a feature that's coming that everybody will have. But I also sort of tweeted over him during the event and said, I actually think this is more of a Pentium moment for now, just because you can feel the limits of compute with a lot of our experiences. And that means over the course of the next however many years, you're right, there's going to be things that it can do and things that it can't do. And there'll be some machines that can do all these wonderful things with AI and some that can't. And so because of that, it sort of makes me think about this as it is a moment. Like, it's a moment for the industry and it's a moment for the PC. And we're at the very beginning of that, which is why I think people are setting this stage to, you're going to see these devices in 2024. It's going to continue in 25, 26. They'll get faster. They'll get more capable in terms of what they can do. And so we're sort of on a, I hate to keep coming back to this as well. It's just a refresh. We're at a moment where these devices get an increase of capabilities they didn't have before. And it's only a couple times in the industry have we ever seen this kind of a pivot point, which is the only point I'll make to say why it's significant, whether we like the name, which we don't. But regardless, it's significant in that this is something we'll reflect on and say that was the turning point, right? That we now have that functionality in all these devices, and it actually adds a lot of value to people's lives and work life, whatever.
And I think it's the first time that value is across the whole value chain, right? Whether it is Microsoft from a Windows perspective, and then the first-party apps, that run on it, whether it is the developers that take advantage of it, the silicon that empowers all of this. So we really have value there across the ecosystem, and then that makes the value to the consumer and final user even more tangible. I do like as well something that came out from the Intel event, what MJ said. She was asked, as the lead for compute, what is an AI PC, and what is the value, and she said, I don't know yet. And I think that was maybe not the answer that some people were expecting, but I think she's absolutely spot on. And the reason is that the value is gonna be different for me as it is for you, right? It is really about, if AI, and generative AI in particular, is to be successful, it will have to deliver a different experience based on my needs versus your needs versus somebody else's. And otherwise is smart maybe, but not that intelligent, right? If the idea is that every machine is going to deliver the same value, whether you are using it in a creator experience or an education experience, it can be that way. So I really appreciated her kind of honesty. And I think that the other part is, and not just honesty, but foresight in actually thinking about it the right way, and not starting to think too much about, forcing something. And I think linked to that is something that Intel has been doing for quite some time now, really the focus on experiences versus just speeds and feeds. And so the idea that you don't just deliver a set of applications and a set of features, but you're really focusing on bringing those to life into an experience.
Well, and I think that points out, the moment that we're in, which is actually even different than just the last couple of cycles, where if you look back to the specific Intel point, which was not just Centrino, but even look at what they tried to do with Ultrabooks, and now you have Evo, which were actually much more hardware centric things that was really a combination of hardware, whereas this time it's hardware but there's way more software involved. Like, again, it's almost like that very early kind of Windows 95 moment where you saw a lot of software innovation on top of increased compute capabilities. Like, this is to me, we're more in a moment like that than we are just, it's just new hardware, right? In terms of the cycle, which I think speaks to how the ecosystem approaches this, because, again, they have a lot of challenges. The OEMs are sitting there looking at now a number of silicon providers with variations of what they can do. They obviously need a lot of help from Microsoft in terms of unlocking the potential of these things. But let's hit on this point, right? So the ecosystem challenges in this moment. Let's outline a couple of those. So where do you think some of the major issues are that hold? Let's come with this. Let's say that hold back the potential in 2024, just for 2024's sake, for this point.
That they're going to get in their own way instead of actually all coming together. Because, as you said, obviously there's a Microsoft, there are different silicon providers, and then there's the OEMs, and everybody's competing with everybody else. But this is actually a time where the ecosystem has to come together. and be crystal clear on the value that they bring versus who they need to focus on as the competition, which is Apple. It's difficult enough because of all the different SKUs that you have, because of what we said from a silicon perspective, it's not going to be in once and done, right? It's going to be a path. And so you're going to have different experiences that are going to be delivered. There's a time where some things will be available with some, silicon providers and not others, and trying to make sense of all of that, and Microsoft needs to really lead that conversation. And we know well that when you have consistency of messaging across the ecosystem wins, right? And I think that another point that was made that I thought was very clever is pointing out the opportunity that there is from a developer perspective within the PC ecosystem, and in that case, particularly from an Intel perspective. But also the ability, for instance, for Qualcomm to bring an ecosystem. They've done it before on smartphones, and they're capable of do that again around ARM. So I think that coming together to fight a common enemy, for lack of better words, has to be the priority, because by doing that, they will be forced to simplify their message and being consistent and cohesive.
Yeah. I wonder, like, the more I've thought about this, especially just after, again, the AMD and the Intel event, is I wonder how much this moment will require the OEMs to perhaps refine their portfolios than before. Because, again, I think the challenge we have is you can't get into the situation where you're literally like studying the minuscule of every spec to say, can it do what I think it needs to do?
Yeah.
Now, I think we both agree, like, nobody should just come out and say, hold up a unit and say, this is my AI PC, but they should say, this meets the requirement for these experiences that you hope you're going to have, either in a consumer or an enterprise context, which I think is going to force them to really think about these things, and then to some degree, to the Apple point, like, reestablish what their champion is. Like, who are their brands and their lineups that you're going to put at a retail shelf, or you're going to come out and give to your top tier enterprise sales teams to push, that are the refined sort of champions that embody all of these things. And that's a bit of a different strategy than we've seen, really the last 10 years in the PC ecosystem.
Yeah, I wonder if it's a little bit of a smartphone moment where, you saw most of the player really reducing. I remember, because sadly I've been following the smartphone market for a very long time when, Nokia was still the leading vendors, and sorry, Nokia. But the point was that at that time, just at the beginning of a smartphone market, so you're talking about early 2000, every vendor had like 30 to 40 SKUs. Think about that, and think where you are now, where you end up with 2 or 3. Right. Now, the PC market is slightly different because the needs are different depending where you are, especially from a knowledge worker perspective. But in my opinion, AI is going to change some of that, right? Yeah. The value is going to increase across the board. And so you still need to hit certain price points. But I totally agree with you that simplifying the portfolio will be something that vendors will have to think about.
Yeah, I feel like it's kind of one of those, and I actually think your analogy is probably really, really good in terms of, the move from really feature phones to smartphones necessitated a little bit more of a clean lineup. And maybe this move from, again, our PCs are smart, but they're not as smart as they're going to be when they get AI. Yeah. Maybe that's the same moment to say, no, look, here's your options. Here's what Dell offers. Here's what Lenovo offers. Here's what HP offers, et cetera. And it's really a couple SKUs, because they're not going to compete with Apple if they don't do that. And it helps people just understand these are the smart computers. I don't want a dumb word, but these are the smarter
right
computers.
At the high end of a portfolio.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about kind of what I think everybody asks us about right now, which is, what are we going to do with these AI PCs, these smarter, enhanced computers? Like, what's the value there? I think starting with some of the use cases we've seen and talked about, and really kind of teasing out perhaps where developers can take this is kind of the key. But let's jump to that bit. What are some of the low hanging value propositions?
I think there for me there are a couple of things. The first one is what I was referring to earlier, where I think with AI you're gonna unleash so many more features and experiences to users, and this is something that Microsoft has highlighted before, and I totally agree with them. You know, if your AI is able to either anticipate what I'm doing, or, you know, allowing me to ask for something in a different way. Maybe I'm just asking for, I don't know, like a setting or whatever. Instead of doing 5 steps to get to it, my engagement will grow, my ability to find new features is gonna improve, and therefore I'm gonna use my device more, I'm gonna grow more, you know, attached to it, and hopefully I will replace it more often if I feel that I get more value. So that's one thing. So it is really bringing to life PCs across the board. The other one is the point that I made earlier, you know, following what NJ said at Intel, which is going to be a little bit different depending on, you know, what your workflow is and how you use it. And I think that that's where maybe starts to be a little bit of kind of complexity in a way, when you have so many different layers where, you know, for a user, I'm trying to understand, okay, is the value coming from the OS that I'm running? Is the value coming from the application that I'm using? Or is the value coming from the hardware? Right. And the reality is that it's going to be a mix of all of these, right? So there's going to be something that is hardware driven around sound, around camera, around display, and all these kind of things that all the OEMs are going to be able to deliver. And then applications that are going to be smarter, and then the OS itself that is going to be, you know, surfacing certain things more than ever, or easier, in an easier way. And the reason why this is harder on the PC side is that it's going to be interesting to see, I as a user, where I put the value in terms of who do I blame when things go wrong, and who do I give credit to when I get a great experience. You know, for Apple, that is much easier because they control all of it. So they get the benefit of, you know, the credit and the blame when things don't work. On the PC side, it's going to be a little bit more complicated.
Yeah. I guess I look at it too, like this, the hard way to explain this is most people benefit in some capacity on their iOS devices, their Android devices, their Windows devices, and Mac OS devices from AI. They just don't know it. It's not obvious. And so I sort of look at it as there's a bunch of stuff that happens today that is valuable, that's doing things on your behalf, but your brain doesn't say, like, that's an AI, right? That's yeah. Now the question is, are we moving to things like, I think ChatGPT was really that thing where you tried it and you're like, that, like, you saw it, it was obvious, like this thing is talking to you in a very natural way, and so it was exposing obvious elements of AI, and I think that's the difference here, because there's always been a lot that goes on behind the scenes, especially around cameras and video and image optimization. And now we're moving to this stage where you're going to see these platforms at an operating system level, at a software level, just be more obvious. And just going back to some stuff that came out of the Intel event, because I completely agree with the way that Pat Gelsinger talked about this, and you hit it on also, is saying it's more of an augmentation than just artificial intelligence is a better way to look at it, because the goal should be to make us more productive, to enhance what we're already doing, and augmenting that makes more sense than saying, well, it's just an art. And I think if we look at it that way, That's a better way to move the platform forward from a software development and a platform standpoint than just trying to create these things that feel like I'm talking to a sentient robot in my computer, basically.
Yeah, and it puts the user more in control. It takes away some of the fear that some might have about, the machine overtaking everything. And it really, in my view, encapsulate the power that we have with this moment. There was another smart point that I wanted to make that you made me think of, and of course, it's now gone forever. So I will try and recall. But you said something that triggered a thought, as always the case. So keep on talking.
Well,
and I might think about it.
Okay. If you think about it, jump in. But let's move to the company who will never say that they have an AI PC, which is
Well, maybe
Apple.
they will. I don't know.
Okay, I would never say never, but it's unlikely. Clearly, Apple has talked up machine learning, right? And in a lot of the examples that I talked about around things that happen behind the scenes, Apple likes to point that out, is that they've been doing AI, but they haven't been exposing anything obvious like you're seeing kind of these other platforms talk about, like I said. So what's this, and Apple's obviously very happy with their silicon roadmaps. They're going to believe they have very capable devices to do these things, large language models, training, etc. But they're also not going to talk about it, right? And so I think they're in a spot where they want to get credit in this category without being in the category, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I get this question a lot, and I remember the point that actually fits quite nicely into this, which is that, people say, oh, why is Apple not talking about it, or are they behind? First of all, just because we're not talking about it doesn't mean that they're not doing it, to your point. They've been doing AI for a while, but to me, the simple reason why I don't think that they're jumping on the AI PC kind of terminology is the fact that, and generally the term Gen AI, but they continue to focus on machine learning, is that machine learning brings the value right to the hardware, right? It's clear that, Apple doesn't have a cloud play the same way as Microsoft does, right? So for them to talk about machine learning, there's no question that the value is on the hardware that you buy, and therefore, the prices and everything else is justified. The point I wanted to make as well, when it comes to the challenge that the PC ecosystem has a little bit more so than Apple does, is that obviously trying to get they need to get users to understand the value of edge computing, right? Right now, we all are using ChatGPT and other solutions, and we're doing so in the cloud, 99% of the time. We started to see some implementation of technologies like Rewind and others on device, but it's very hard for the normal Joe to understand, or Josephine, to understand what is done on device versus cloud, and more importantly, why it should be, right? And so that's one of the challenges as well that I think the PC OEMs have, and to some extent Microsoft. And we know why it matters, right? Privacy, efficiency, cost. We talked about this before, but to a normal consumer, that might not be immediately obvious what is possible and what isn't. But going back to the Apple point, is really around the bringing value to the hardware, and therefore machine learning is a term that everybody understands. And also, in my view, is a less threatening term, if you like. You don't question, maybe in the same way what DAI can do. And the learning part, that is maybe something that people take pause on, it's not as much of a concern when it's Apple, because as a brand, they are trusted, right or wrong, they are trusted.
Yeah. I guess the part that I still am going to be fascinated to see how Apple handles this does come back to some marketing, because
Oh,
I
for
think
sure.
I think the sensitivity is that, the world starts talking up these very blatantly obvious AI features at an operating system level and at a software level. And right or wrong, right, perception becomes that these Windows machines are the things that are doing all this interesting AI stuff. Whether or not a person's ever spent the time to explore if that's true, then they walk into a retail and they see these things that might very well sit on a shelf with a label that says AI PC. I don't know, but it seems possible. And then go to those and go, oh, look at all these fun things I can do, and I can see how it works, and then maybe not even consider, right, that part of the Mac. So I think that's what the Windows world wants to have happen in this competition with Mac. I think for Apple, they're going to need to do a little bit perhaps more marketing around these things than perhaps they've liked to do in the past, which means they'll have to be a bit more obvious about the software, the language. Again, maybe not necessarily saying that it's an AI or Gen AI. I don't know how they want to market it, but they're going to have to make it obvious, is my point. And that's not something I think they love to do in marketing, but we know enterprises are going to want to specifically buy machines that are capable of on-device AI. And Apple's going to want to make sure they're in that conversation, as well as creators, where this could become a real opportunity for creators and for Windows and others to gain share, because it's a great place in the creator ecosystem for Gen AI. So that'll be curious. I don't know how they get over this, but I'm fascinated to watch kind of the marketing battle that they may be forced to play that they don't always love to play in this regard.
Yeah, maybe we have another what's a PC moment. I don't know.
What's a PC? What's an AI PC? What's yeah. Okay. Well, that's 2024, right? We all
That
agree
is
that you're going to hear a whole
2024.
lot more about AI PCs in 2024. So, to the degree that we all care about client and PC devices, get prepared to be inundated about the AI PC. So,
And know that is only the beginning, right? To your point at the very start of the podcast,
very
2024
early.
is just the beginning.
Very early. Well, on that, we'll close. Happy holidays, everybody. We will be back around the CES timeframe, possibly with some semi-live content, maybe. I don't know.
Possibly.
Ish, possibly. It's a work in progress. It's a flow in progress. But thanks for listening. Send us feedback. We appreciate your time. Have a good one.
Happy holidays.